The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. And joining me for this episode, our early signing period review of the Gators' new signees is Will Sammon from The Athletic. Will, it's always a crazy time keeping up with everything that goes on with signing day. Um, third year now for the early signing day period, and we're just kind of now getting into a groove of what to expect in December.
Definitely, man. It kind of feels like this is the day, right? It
Yep.
took a couple of years. I kind of got the vibe like last year it was getting to be that way because it was no longer all that new. But now at this point, I think people have really started to just like understand that December is when pretty much everybody signs, and this is when your class really starts to take shape and become official.
Absolutely. So plenty to talk about here, of course, with the Gators getting their signees in today. We'll get straight to it. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the past episodes there, as well as News4Jax coverage of the Gators and more college football as well. Catch the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. So many ways to get Gators Breakdown, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So we'll use the 24/7 sports composite here as we talk about where these Gators are, and the Gators rank 8 on the 24/7 sports composite. Will only good for 6th in the SEC. That's just how it works in this conference here, behind Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Texas A&M, and Auburn. Look, 2 of those teams you play every season, and we'll be playing one of those West teams more than likely in the SEC championship game. It's different recruiting in this conference. So, with 24 signees and commits, the Gators have a player average of 90.04. And part of that 24 are unsigned prospects: wide receiver Leonard Manuel, athlete Mark Britt, and offensive lineman Jovan Navier. So, Will, this class is headlined by some studs on the defensive side of the ball, Jervin Dexter and Derek Wingo. And then you brought in a tailor-made quarterback in Anthony Richardson, some big-time additions into the trenches. We came into today with a good start based on commitments that were already there for the Gators, and those guys stayed with their pledges. So credit to Dan Mullen for that part of it. And we'll get into it. There were some misses out there today, but Florida had a great base to start with, and players that should contribute in big ways for this team.
It did. They have a handful of early enrollees, which I'm sure we'll go through. And a bunch of those guys profile as players capable of making some sort of an early impact. I'm not saying that they're going to be like immediate starters or anything like that. They're not. But they're going to get some early playing time, a few of them. And so that's critical for them. But yeah, it's kind of funny because like today we kind of go into it sort of not expecting surprises or anything like that, but it's supposed to be like a newsy day. It's the first day of the early signing period across the country. All these teams are making moves, and Florida. The funny thing is, they didn't do anything. It's like they didn't get anybody, but nobody left either, which is something that not a whole lot of people are talking about, just because everybody's focused on what you get. The other side of it too is that nobody defected from the class, so there was absolutely like nothing that changed between yesterday and today, which is kind of funny because you don't really see that too often for a day like today. But yeah, it just kind of points to just the idea of, like you were saying, David, they built the class early on for the most part. There were some fairly recent additions lately, but for the most part, it was built early on, and a bunch of these guys stayed committed. They haven't had a decommitment for a few months now. I think Morgan Joseph may have been the last one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so.
A few months back, and I think either.
Or that wide receiver tight end guy from Valdosta. Oh,
Johnson,
yeah.
too. But for the most part, like these guys, they stayed committed. So there wasn't really any surprises today, good or bad for the Gators. Which, if you're a Florida fan, you wanted more, clearly. And like you were alluding to, also, they're at a really strong level at number 8, but they're not at an elite level, which to me is the biggest takeaway. Is that it's good, it's really good, and it's better, and it's getting better, but you're not there yet.
Yeah, I think the question as far as that goes is look, you were close against Georgia, in the game this past year, 7 points away. what do you contribute that loss to? Do you contribute it to coaching? Do you contribute it to talent? And if it's talent, then okay, well, did that get any better after today with what Florida was able to do, what Georgia was able to do, and of course the other teams as well? You fought tooth and nail with LSU; they come in with a great class as well. So as I said, these are teams that you do have to face, and teams that are in front of Florida, but I think also you can look at it, and every year is going to be different. But where do we think Florida struggled the most in those games? And it was probably up front, offensive line and defensive line. Well, you know what? Those were addressed this class.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean the game's going to play out the same way next year, the year after that. But of course, there was a need in those positions, and the hope there is okay. Maybe you don't get beat that way again with what you've brought in with this class. So that is the question. Will is with Florida at 8 and those teams in front of them, is it enough? You're not going to shrink the talent level. You're not going to close the gap with what Georgia, Alabama, and what they're able to do. It's just all, I guess, as a fan and how you look at it, is how close do you think Dan Mullen and the Gators already are? And with what they did today, does that make you feel better about going against Georgia, going against Alabama? Because look, you look at Georgia next year, just take next year as an example, and that could be a team. And look, this class really is not going to play too much into next year's game. But since we're talking about closing the gap, you look at a Georgia team next year that could be losing Jake Fromm, could be losing DeAndre Swift, could be losing 3 offensive linemen, and they're starting a true freshman like Carson Beck in the game in Jacksonville. So, I mean, you'll take that right now, especially what Jake Fromm has been able to do the last few years against these Gators. So look, in particular, this recruiting class isn't gonna play too much into next season's game, but it is a barometer of how close this team is to Georgia. And one thing I think that we get caught up in on National Signing Day is, what will this class do? Well, you know what? You have to pair this class with 2 classes before it, the class before it, the class after it. By the time this class is all said and done.
So your question, my funny answer was going to be that you could always find different ways to lose, David.
Yeah.
Not to be a jerk, but but no, I think to get to one of your main questions there, it's a great conversation to have. I think that, look, the 5-star thing, to me, it's a real thing. You got to recruit at a high level like that. You got to land some 5 stars, and in this class doesn't feature any. Although I will say that Dexter should probably be one, and I think he's at like number 32 on the composite for 247, and I think they may cap it at 32, like when it's all said and done. So he's pretty much all but a 5-star at this point.
And if you use different services too, Wingo is a 5-star on Rivals.
But the point is that like you need more than that.
Yeah.
Right. So even if those 2 guys were to become 5 stars a month from now, or whenever the final rankings are tallied up or whatever are released, you're still lacking in that department compared to the teams that you mentioned that you're going to have to play again, and you're going to have to play every year. So I'm not sure. It's like one of those things that in some ways, yes, because you didn't have the lines to compare to those 2 schools. Like you just didn't this past year. And so in theory, that should be down the road sooner rather than later, something that gets shored up in comparison to what you had this year. And then there's some other areas, like in the defensive back, like you were mentioning, how you could kind of compare it to previous cycles. It's kind of interesting that I look back, and in this group of 7 defensive back commits or signees at this point, their average recruiting ranking is actually higher than the 2017 group that included CJ Henderson, Marco Wilson, Brad Stewart, Sean Davis, the guys who are pretty much all starting now or had all started this past year. So I found that kind of interesting. That was one of my takeaways today too. But you're right. Like it's hard to say like this is the class that either close the gap or not, particularly when it's not full of 5 stars and you don't really know exactly how your rosters are going to look at this point. It's still a little bit too early to kind of say like, okay, this is exactly where we got better. This is exactly where we improved or closed that gap. You just don't know, especially now with the transfer portal. There's so much back and forth and attrition, adding and subtraction, I should say, that you just don't know exactly. So it's nice to say that like the defensive line and the offensive line have been improved and it's accurate. But you don't know if that's going to be the issue 2 years from now. Maybe it's the wide receivers that maybe you should have gotten more of, that you needed more playmakers in a certain game. Who knows?
Right.
It's just one of those things.
Right. And if you recruit well across the board, then
Yeah.
but but
Yeah.
right. But here's the thing, it's hard to do. Look, I mean, you go and look at Georgia for a team that recruited so well. They struggled at wide receiver this past year, and it held them back in certain spots. So yeah, as you said, it's so hard to tell what's coming up in years to come there, and it's just I guess another way to look at it, and this was the way I started it when Dan Mullen was hired, is how close does he have to get to those teams? Does he
Yeah.
have to recruit one? Does he have to recruit two? Does he have to recruit three? I don't think so, but the gap can't be huge. And I don't necessarily think it's a huge gap right now, because on the field it shows that it's really not. You were tooth and nail with LSU. You were tooth and nail with Georgia. They were clearly the better teams. So you go get those one players. You go get those two players that go make a difference. As you said, the 5 stars that Florida has to get. Is it one player? Is it two players? Is it three players? We don't know the answer to that right now. And then, of course, there's the ever so popular, with Dan Mullen can develop better than anybody else in the top 10. When you look at coaches in the top 10, well, that may be well and good, but why can't we have both? And that's the question there. So I do believe he's a great developer. I do believe he closes the gap as soon as the two teams step on the field. But you still got to have those one or two players to go out there and make that difference. And that's not to say I'm not happy with this. That's not to say I'm not happy with this class. This is a really good class, as we said, coming into the day. This class really good, really elite on the defensive side of the ball in spots. We'll get into that there. But the ultimate question is, just how far this recruiting class compares to the elites.
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, it's something that we can't really definitively answer, of course.
Yeah.
But the thing is, too, is that what's development? Development takes time. And that's something that, if you're a Florida fan, you don't want to be waiting more than a couple of years at this point anymore. You want to be saying to yourself, okay, we could beat this team. We could beat Georgia next season. You don't want to be taking guys, because that's another one of Dan Mullen's MOs, which, he has a track record of this. So it works out. It checks out that he takes guys who may have been under-recruited, guys, undervalued by some also, whom they have higher on their boards. And I get that. But more often than not, those type of guys need to be developed, and you're seeing some potential in them that you have to tap into. And again, more often than not, they do tap into it, but it just takes a couple of years in a lot of those cases.
Right. So, something we, as we said, we can give Dan Mullen a whole lot of credit for in this class is being able to stick with the guys that committed to him, and those guys sticking with Florida. We know the saga that surrounded Anthony Richardson, and decommitting and looking around and committing back and getting back in this class around the whole Carson Beck situation as well. In the spring, Joshua Braun committed to Georgia, stayed with Georgia. Coaching change there for the offensive line. You get him late, some of the top players here, but Gervin Dexter or all right, is it Gervin Dexter or Gervin Dexter? Didn't Mullen say Gervin today, right?
Gervin.
Okay, making sure there. I want to
Gervon, actually, I think it is.
Okay, Gervon. There we go. I want to make sure I get it right. So Gervon Dexter, look, courted by Georgia. Even a report late last night that he may be on flip watch.
That was a funny one, right?
That was man, tell you. The guy had to go make an explanation and everything for it, but kind of weird there. But we knew Kirby Smart was interested, and that was the team to watch for. But I don't think we ever really felt that Dexter was going to lead this class. Derek Wingo, you flip him from Penn State, and he is one of the strongest recruiters on the team, one of the probably leaders that we'll look for in the team. There, and then there, so many flips with this class as well. So a lot of credit goes for like a player like Mordecai McDaniel last Friday when Braun flipped as well there. But you also had a long time commit like Rashad Torrance from the state of Georgia with a lot of interest there too. So yeah, a lot of credit to getting these guys in, identifying them early. They stayed committed for a while. Like another player, Travis Johnson, underrated kid. They identified him early and then started getting some recent offers late. Even Clemson an offer recently as well. So a lot of credit goes to Dan Mullen for the guys who we came into today with knowing they were going to be Gators and no drama whatsoever.
Yeah, and did you? I don't know if a lot of people kind of knew this or pointed it out, but one of the more underreported things along those lines were the takes of Avery Helm from Texas and Rashad Torrance from Georgia, because both those guys didn't play as juniors. Torrance was ruled ineligible after I think he moved, and so he didn't play as a junior, missed his whole junior year, and Helm tore his ACL, so he was out the whole year too. And both those guys committed to Florida. Florida took their commitments before their senior seasons, and those were two other guys who, once they started playing games, other colleges took notice of them, and maybe they weren't on Twitter a whole lot, like boasting about their offers or promoting themselves or sharing that they got offers, but they did get offers, and they did get more interest. But it was Florida who were on those two guys early, believed in those guys early, despite not seeing them play or knowing that they wouldn't be playing for a little while. And they trusted their evaluations on it, which is something that's been a theme and a hallmark for Mullen and his staff. And those are two kind of under the radar, underreported ones that kind of come to mind as well, along with the other guys that you listed. So there are a couple of guys who are, who got their due later on too, like Johnson, and I think Torrance got a bump. Avery Helm, I think, got a bump as well as far as the ratings go. And we'll see what happens from now until, like I said earlier, the final rankings are released. But again, those are just a couple of more examples of, the staff kind of knowing what they're doing and kind of trusting their own evaluations, which is a big part of it as well.
Absolutely, and they've been proven there at that point from time at Mississippi State and some of the guys that they brought in from Florida so far as well in Dan Mullen's tenure. So, well, you kind of brought it up in looking at the defense and the secondary and how highly rated it is compared to some of the last classes. And I went and looked at, because I think we know this class is slanted more towards the defense than it is the offense so far. And I wanted to break down the average ranking for each side of the ball and kind of had to do some different ways of looking at it here, and maybe do some forecasting as well. The average on offense, and I'm including Mark Britt here for wide receiver purposes, the commit here. He's listed as an athlete. With what Florida hasn't been able to do at receiver so far in this class, I'm just going to add him there for the sake of it right now. But
honestly, that's probably not a bad idea, just because chances are they may add one anyway. Whether it's him or not, who knows? But that's probably a decent placeholder, if anything, to kind of give us an accurate assessment anyway.
Right. So looking at that, the average for the offense, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, would be an 89.24. Turn that around, and the average for the defense, 91.48. So to me, anything above 90 is pretty darn good when you're looking at the way 24/7 Sports ranks their defensive talent. And of course, I mean, headline, Gervin Dexter there on the defensive, Gervon. Let me get that right. Let's go get on my nerves there. But as you said, 31st ranked player in the country, third ranked at his position. Big get there for the Gators. Had to hold off, Georgia just trying to nip at the heels there. But Antoine Powell, Johnny Brown, Jalen Lee, the recent commit, changing his mind from LSU to Florida, Lamar Goods as well. I mean, all those guys rated 4 stars, top 350 top 350 players in the country there. Lamar Goods comes in at 349. So in the trenches, Will, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys that are ranked in the top 350 sitting there at this defensive front.
It's huge, and I think Goods and Powell are both guys who are supposedly enrolling early, according to Florida. And so you would think that they would be able to kind of get some early playing time, perhaps, even if it's just some snaps here and there in some games, because they need that depth. I mean, Schuler is going to be gone, and so that's an area where you needed guys in that interior, because you only have now Kyrie Campbell, Slayton, Conley, if he's back healthy. And then beyond that, you only signed Humphreys last year, and he didn't play at all. So, who do you have? So you're going to have to rely on these guys to provide some level of depth anyway, let alone the fact that they're pretty talented. And so you could kind of probably throw Dexter into that mix too, just because of how big he is and how talented he's supposed to be, even though he hasn't really played football all that long. I mean, he just started playing competitive football a couple of years ago, or 2 years ago, in fact, I think. So I would still throw him in there, though, just because of how talented he is, how large of a human being he is. So, but I think it's also credit to David Turner. A lot of people have said that, but the thing is that you got to remember that David Turner was at UTSA. So he wasn't recruiting these type of guys, so it's like, He just got here in January. And so the thing for me is that you look ahead and you say, okay, David Turner was somebody who was able to make these connections with 2020 kids early, get these kids, get a couple of them to commit, one of them to flip, hold on to them as well. And he's only been,
And I'm glad you said hold on to him as well. I know some people don't want to really give him credit for that, but come on. I mean, these are guys who could have easily went somewhere else because this is the guy they don't know.
yeah, especially in the case of Dexter, considering like how talented that guy is, could have gone anywhere. So the point is though, is that the guy got here in January. He was able to make these connections, and that really is a good sign going forward, because you would think with the 2021 class, the 2022 class, that David Turner is not going to be an unknown to these guys anymore. He knows these kids.
All right, and one guy I definitely want to get to because I know you've had a lot of conversations with him and his family, and recently looking at the Athletic as well and some of your work there. Derek Wingo, and just the type of person he is, the type of kid he is. I'll forget about football for a second, and I remember being at Friday Night Lights, you and I were hanging out together, him walking outside the stadium, and him and his mom, and just enjoying every bit of it, because that was right after he committed to Florida, and this was kind of our first glimpse of him in person, and the way he comes about, way he stands up to himself as well. He's just a really stand-up kid, and you go and look at videos of him, and this is in a way about football, but just the way leadership is out there, and the way he speaks to his team, and even his coaches say, hey, look, when he speaks, we shut up. He's the type of guy that is a leader, and kids like to follow him. So Derek Wingo is one kid that is probably and I want to say this about Dexter too. You said his football time has been limited, but these are two guys I think I want to see on the field as soon as possible, because those are, to me, are the type of hey, those guys are only here for 3 years. Let's get them on the field as soon as possible.
And also other guys rally around those type of players. Those are outspoken guys. Those are guys who are going to hold other guys accountable. And that's something that Florida has really lacked. I think Freddie Swain and Josh Hammond and David Reese, to an extent, did a good job in their own respective ways. And I think Freddie was, in particular, a great leader in a lot of respects for Florida. But one thing, all those guys are going to be gone after this bowl game. And secondly, I'm not too sure that there are many, say, sophomores and juniors who are ready to emerge in those respective roles at this point. I just don't know. We'll see. But I do know, just from observing Derek with his high school team, look, you don't really ever know for sure how a high school player is going to sort of assimilate himself or react in a college environment. We've learned that here at Florida with different guys who we thought were, the greatest people on earth at one point, but then things happen. But Derek Wingo, man, he checks all those boxes for you that you want to look for in a high school student to bring onto your football team. The guy's really well spoken, really articulate, very strong leader. Like I said, holds other guys accountable. He was the guy on his high school team who would rally the guys around him, perform those pregame speeches, motivate guys on the sideline, give players tips during practices, really everything. So if you're looking at one guy who is as close to being ready at a college level, who's just playing high school right now, it's probably Derek Wingo. And that's especially necessary for the linebacker room, because you do lose David Reese. And although I think highly of Ventrell Miller, and I think he has some really good leadership skills, Ventrell's not going to be here all that long either. He's only got 2 years of eligibility left, and he needs some more consistency on the field too, for that matter. Wingo's the type of guy who not only is he a leader, but he's also a superb talent as well. He's a highly talented player.
I mean, there were plenty of times St. Thomas Aquinas was on national TV, so we got to see him play a lot this past fall. He's a missile out there, always around the ball. And they asked him to do a lot of things, too. He could cover from the linebacker spot. He could play rush end. He could play defensive end in high school. He was in the backfield a lot. I mean, this guy, they asked him to do everything on that defense, and he was able to do it. Now, of course, he'll settle into a role out Florida, but it's still, and even going back to past classes there, for Grantham and Christian Robinson, and what they're able to do, speaking just the versatility that they're able to get from these guys, and what we see on high school film, and maybe how that translates. You've seen it kind of play its part in a player like Amari Burney, with the way they've been able to line him up in different spots. I think they're getting another versatile piece. He doesn't have to be versatile, but I think they're getting another versatile piece here in Wingo.
Definitely, and I'm not for nothing, but that's really what you need, I think, in this day and age at that inside linebacker spot or that middle
Mm.
linebacker spot. You need that versatility. I mean, we've seen that in the SEC really, where guys are being asked to cover a lot more than say that they would have, especially one on one, and you can get exposed really easily that way and get burned. Yeah, I think Derek is probably in line to play more of that inside linebacker role in this particular defense. Although he was used primarily this past season as a more of like an edge rusher type, a defensive end type for his high school team. But like you said, I mean, he could play anywhere. I mean, he could play QB for a couple of years at the high school level. So I mean, he's to me, he's the real deal. I think he's not going to enroll early, but he's among the guys in my mind who will get early snaps.
All right, and we look here at the defensive back part of this recruiting class. Jahiri Rogers, Ethan Pouncey, Mordecai McDaniel, Rashad Torrance, Avery Helm, Trevez Johnson, Finley Graham is there as well. But like I said, he's another guy. Maybe he gets a look on offense as well, with just because of his punt return ability. We know he's good with the ball in his hands. So Finley Graham's another person just because of kind of what's happening at receiver. Maybe gets a look in maybe that kind of Kadarius Toney role, if you want to kind of look for a gadget type of player in this class. But even Dan Mullen was asked about it today. I did a Periscope earlier today, Will, and somebody was asking me of one of the more underrated players of this class. And look, I'm a little biased being here in Jacksonville, but Trevez Johnson fits that mold to me. I've been around some coaches here in the Jacksonville area. I work with some people who know Trevez, and we saw it with his rise recently in the rankings of a guy that wasn't necessarily highly touted. This staff identified early on, and I mean, he's a missile out there. Another guy who really likes to be physical. He's not afraid to hit. He's another versatile piece where you can line him up at safety. You can line him up at nickel. They're kind of similar to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in that aspect. So, we look at the secondary and as highly rated as it is, but I still think one of the more underrated players that could emerge from that top is Trevez Johnson.
Oh, no doubt. There's a reason why I wrote about him last month was because of that reason. Everybody that I spoke to on multiple levels couldn't say enough couldn't speak more highly of the guy. I mean, he was when he committed to Florida, if I get this correctly, Dan Mullen actually cited it. So, shout out to the Athletic as well. But he cited this. So it was. I should remember this because I wrote it, but I'm having trouble. It was when Trevez committed. When he committed, he was the lowest commit among any SEC team.
Mm.
So out of Tennessee didn't have anybody lower. South Carolina didn't have anybody lower. Ole Miss didn't have anybody lower. He was the lowest guy.
Vanderbilt
did not have anybody lower. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm like here.
Sorry, not trying to throw shade at Vanderbilt here.
I got to Ole Miss. I'm like, God, there has to be somebody less than that.
Arkansas
didn't have anybody less than him either. So it was Trevez Johnson, man. And so that was kind of funny, I thought. So I wrote about that. And you interview a bunch of people, and they all say kind of the same things about him. His speed, his measurables, they all panned out. And it was just the fact that he didn't really go to camps a lot. So that was really the main reason why he didn't get a ranking or he wasn't getting offers. But I mean, man, there's a lot of reasons why Clemson recently offered him just like about a month or two ago. And there's a reason why Florida has been on him for so long, several months at this point since seeing him. So it jumps off the page when you watch his film. He's a hard hitter, like you said. I like him a lot. He's among the guys on the defensive side that doesn't really get a whole lot talked about in comparison to other guys, but he's somebody that's probably going to be there in a couple of years where you're like, okay, we're glad we got this guy on our team.
My only worry for him is how many times he's going to get thrown out for targeting.
Hard hitter, man. He's definitely one of those dudes who like makes the offensive player like hate playing football for a few seconds because that stuff must hurt. When he hits you, you could just tell. I mean, you saw the same thing, right? I mean, like he's slamming these kids. Another guy who I kind of like a lot, who I don't think gets talked about a whole lot, and it's kind of funny because he's like the third highest ranked kid is that guy Rogers from Texas. I think
Yeah.
that guy's really good. And it's kind of funny because I think if he played in Florida, we wouldn't be talking. We would be talking about this kid nonstop. I feel like, but I think because he's an out-of-state kid,
Yeah,
uh,
he's a top 120 player.
man, he's a number 7 corner, and it's like we don't really talk about him a whole lot. But I think he's a really good player if you watch his film too. And he's somebody who I think also played quarterback for a little while just before this past season too. So another guy who's up there and who's definitely another corner in a long list of obviously recent cornerback success as far as recruiting goes.
Yeah, and quickly on him, 24/7 Sports in their evaluation of him, athlete with enough height and adequate frame that likely plays cornerback but has some safety projectability. There we go, another versatile piece in the in the defense. Like you said, run heavy quarterback in high school that shows straight line athleticism regularly. Yeah, this is a kid that has played quarterback, not necessarily a lot of secondary film here, but they say that he's efficient athletically, makes plays with the ball in his hands, and shows the ability to accelerate and run past defenders. Has shown above average speed in combine settings and demonstrates good change of direction with some of the nation's better short shuttle times. In man coverage, has reactive quickness and athleticism to be really good. Predictability can get lost in zone coverage and camp settings due to limited experience on defense. Very much a projection due to limited film playing his college position, but has athletic traits to grow into an impact power five starter with mid-round NFL draft potential. So as you said, a lot of it is projection there based on him, but the measurables seem to be good enough for 24/7 Sports to rank him pretty high there as a cornerback.
Yeah, no, he's a great get for them, and a pretty heavy list of defensive guys who are pretty impressive. I'm trying to think of some other guys who I really liked in that class. Like Torrance, I liked a lot too. He was another guy who shores up that safety spot. I mean, all of a sudden, you go from having just those two blue chip safeties, and I guess Brad Stewart and Trey Dean, if you want to count him as a safety. They moved him to corner, so I'm not really sure exactly what the definition of his position is at this point. But say if it's Trey Dean and Brad Stewart, those are two blue chip safeties. You doubled that total with this cycle with Mordecai and Torrance as 4-star safeties. So that's also kind of a big deal too.
All right, and of course, one player will switch to the other side of the ball. One player that, of course, you're close to because you're on the beat there in Gainesville. As Gainesville's very own Anthony Richardson, and kind of close to here in Jacksonville as well. Denny Thompson, his quarterback trainer from here in Jacksonville. I've discussed with him a lot. And look, we go back to the springtime, and when Carson Beck committed to Georgia, and we thought that was going to be him committing to Florida, and we get the surprise commit to Georgia. I had Denny on the podcast, and because of the insight he was going to bring. And look, he was training Carson Beck. He was training Anthony Richardson. He was training Jeff Sims, who committed to Georgia Tech today as well. And Denny specifically said, and this what stood out in the podcast, and everybody liked it because of Denny saying of those quarterbacks, the highest ceiling, he said, would go to Anthony Richardson. So what happens? We fast forward. We go to the fall, and Anthony Richardson is balling out. Improves so much from his junior to senior season, and look, everybody took notice. He had his stock was rising so much in the rankings within the last, with this season. In the last month, he's worked on his accuracy. You've seen that be a big part of his game and his improvement there. And Will, I'm a big proponent. If anybody's listened to this podcast enough, I'm a big proponent. You have to take a quarterback every class just because you never know what happens. We saw what happened with Jalen Jones last year. And Dan Mullen even said it today. He wants 4 on the roster, and that's a big part. And Florida got a really, really good one. And probably, I said it earlier, tailor-made for Dan Mullen's offense is Richardson.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And you mentioned the Carson Beck situation. And, I was always of the belief, based on everything that I had heard, was that they were in the market for 2 guys, and they wanted both of them. And to that point, Mullen said he wants 4 guys, and right now they only got 3. I'm not saying that. I mean, they only got 3 now because of Felipe Franks transferring, and who knew that Felipe Franks would transfer 6 months ago? Nobody did. Maybe somebody would have left the room, though. Who knows? There was a lot of questions for the quarterback room up until just a couple of weeks ago, or last week, or whenever Felipe decided to make it official and transfer. So the point is that I always believe that they were in the market for two guys, or that they viewed Beck and Richardson both so highly that they would take both at the very least. And it is interesting, though, that now, like you said, we fast forward, and it's actually Anthony Richardson who is ranked higher than
Yeah.
Beck on the recruiting services. And so that's obviously a huge credit to Anthony's improved game. And man, I've always liked Anthony Richardson's demeanor and his mentality. His maturity really stood out to me when I spoke to him face to face, and I got to know him a little bit because, like you detailed, he dealt with a lot of that stuff during the recruitment, where Carson Beck was everybody's favorite quarterback in the high school crop from this past cycle for a long time, and Anthony was almost like an afterthought for a while, or a guy that was almost expendable for Florida. And I don't necessarily think that was too fair for him. But he went through it. He experienced a little bit of adversity in that way, and I believe, I'd like to think at least, that he came out a lot stronger mentally as a young guy. And then so he is another one of those guys who's already at practice now. And look, teammates and coaches, they're all going to say nice things about the guys who just got on campus. Not going to say anything bad about the kids. So obviously he's getting a lot of compliments, but I think that a lot of it's genuine too, because he does have a lot of physical tools. He can zip the ball, and obviously he can move. So he's worked hard to get to this point, and his potential is certainly up there, man. It's pretty high.
Absolutely, and keep going through. We're churning through these players here. We go through wide receiver, and that's a point of emphasis for Gator Nation out there right now. And the only signee out of the receiver position right now is Jaquavion Frazier's. Big time wide receiver. Really like what they have in him there. And is the 191st ranked player on 24/7 Sports, 32nd ranked wide receiver, 6'3.5", 194. Big time playmaking wide receiver. I mean, 6'3", 194. That's the type of big bodied receiver that Dan Mullen, Billy Gonzalez have liked in the past, is particularly going back to kind of the Mississippi State mold of wide receivers there. So a big body receiver here for Dan Mullen and Gonzalez.
Yeah, Dan Mullen said that he likes to have 10 guys as far as receivers go. Right now they have 9. But my thing is, I'm not really that concerned if I'm a Florida fan, or if I'm, rooting for Florida or interested in Florida. I'm not really concerned about the quantity of guys. I'm concerned about the quality, the level of talent that you have, because you have a decent group this year. It's not like exactly what Georgia experienced this past season, because you do, or at least you're expecting to return Kadarius Toney, Grimes, Pitts, and Copeland, which those 4 guys on varying levels represent a decent amount of production. When you consider that you're losing 4 pretty talented dudes at the position, you're still returning a few guys who caught a bunch of passes for you and got a bunch of yards. But it's the group after them that you're just really not sure about, because one, they haven't played a whole lot. Secondly, they're young, and then third, they weren't really that highly ranked out of high school, so they represent a lot of question marks. And so, in my opinion, I think that they're better served to go out and try to find somebody maybe in the transfer portal, perhaps, who can maybe solidify that, even if the guy has to sit out a year. Because Mullen even mentioned the older Pouncey brother. They have to apply for a waiver. Actually, I was under the impression that he would be immediately eligible. Apparently, that's not the case. They have to apply for a waiver, according to Mullen. So, but yeah, I think that they'd be better served, or it would perhaps behoove them to get a some sort of transfer at wide receiver to kind of boost the quality or the talent level of that room, not just for the 2020 season, but the 2021 season as well.
Yeah, receivers out there in the transfer portal that available: Justin Shorter, Penn State transfer, and Tariq Black from Michigan. That's 2 headliners there that a lot of people probably
guy, isn't he?
Do what?
Is Shorter the most talented guy?
Yes. Yeah. So
recruiting, by the way. So.
Yeah, and that's the bigger names there that fans may know. Another, of course, commit that Florida has, but we will have to wait till February to see where Leonard Manuel comes in the fold, and hopefully I mean, everybody knows by now. There's just some issues he has to work through to get through, and waiting until February. But another big time talent. He's in the fold right now as far as the commit goes. 6'4", 200 pounds. He's a 251st ranked player in the country. He's kind of fell down because he missed some time this past fall, but one big time receiver that Florida would love to bring into the fold. I believe he's a former 5-star at one time, if I remember right. So, that lets you know the type of talent Florida would be dealing with here. And one, I think, hopefully Florida can get in the fold in February.
Yeah, I don't think there's much denying the fact that that kid could play and that he's talented. It's just a matter of, when he's going to get here, if he's going to get here.
Yeah.
And that's always going to be a question for anybody who didn't sign in December, is if and when they get here. That's going to have to be the caveat that we use with all these guys, because it's just not official until they sign it, of course. So he's a guy. And again, like maybe if they do get him, and they did sign the one receiver today. So I'm just thinking in my head, like, could you sell that, or is that enough? I'm not sure. I still think you need more offensive playmakers. I still think that, regardless, because it's just, I look at this not just for 2020, but like I said earlier, 2021, and I just don't see enough playmakers for Florida on the offensive side.
Yeah, and I get it, because we saw Van Jefferson come in here and have so much success. We saw Trevon Grimes come in and, probably will be a key cog as long as he doesn't go pro. But I get the portal does change things, but to me, it's more beneficial if you're getting a guy 3 or 4 years instead of a guy that you may only have 2 years. It really helps. To me, the better way to build your roster is to build it through recruiting. Much like the NFL, and they talk about it, the better way to build your roster is through the draft, not free agency. I still feel that way about college football. I know the transfer portal is a big wave. It does help. Don't get me wrong, but I think the better part of going out there and building this team is still going out there and recruiting your receivers, because, look, you've identified them as talent. You already know the interest is there from the coaching staff side. If they went out there and accepting the commitment of a kid, you already know that staff likes this kid. So instead of going out there and having to go get a wide receiver in the transfer portal just because of need, at least a guy you went and recruited is somebody that fits this offense.
Yeah, the only thing I agree with all of that. I will add, though, that, and I don't have numbers in front of me, but I would be willing to guess that wide receiver is probably the position that you could probably sign the most out of the transfer portal, if that makes sense. Like, you could probably, out of all the positions, I would assume that wide receiver, just because of, I'm going to stereotype and generalize, but more of those guys want the ball, and they're more likely to leave if they don't get the ball. Just history tells us that. I hate to generalize like that, but hey, whatever. But yeah,
generalizing is accepted on Gators Breakdown.
There we go. So I think if you were looking for a position in the transfer portal, wide receiver is probably the one that you could kind of get away with in signing a couple of guys from there or taking a couple of guys from there. But still, I totally agree with you.
Oh, right. And part of that, this wide receiver talk, Florida was in the running for Sam Brown today. We'll get into some of the other guys Florida missed on today. But since we're on this wide receiver topic here, Sam Brown, I did have Corey Bender on Corey Bender from Rivals on Monday night, and he did throw out watch for West Virginia on this recruitment, and that's where Sam Brown ended up. A lot of people felt comfortable in picking Florida as the destination for wide receiver Sam Brown, but West Virginia won out in the end. And so, as I said, we'll get into some of the other storylines throughout the day with some of the other players Florida didn't get. But before we do get there, we do have to look at this. We talked about the trenches and how important they were for Florida and this offensive line. I mean, you got your bookend tackles right here, and guys that maybe early contributors. Isaiah Walker is looked at as that type of player here from Miami. He signed late tonight. His LOI is in the building, so don't worry about that. But he's the 140th ranked player in the country, 14th ranked offensive tackle in the country, somebody who may step in and fill in at the maybe possibly the right tackle spot there. But Joshua Braun, the recent flip from Georgia, Richard Leonard as well, Gerald Mincy, those are the guys who have sent their letters of intent in, and Will, help me here. Do you know, is it Jovens Javier? There. I don't know necessarily how to pronounce his last name right. So,
Correctly.
do what?
I think you've been hitting it correctly. He's one guy who I haven't really spoke to a whole lot, aside from a couple of messages back and forth. So
Yeah, and we'll see what happens there. I know some
he's
fans are
not
wondering.
a pronunciation guy because he's not a signee yet. So
Right, right. And I know some people are wondering if he'll get if he'll will continue to be in this class later on. We'll see. But look, we know Florida had to improve in the trenches there. You get 2 4 stars in Braun and Walker. Walker, a highly rated 4 star here. Mincy and Leonard, 2 3 stars along this offensive line as well. So we talk about the importance of trenches there. And Florida, I think, gets their bookend tackles.
yeah, absolutely. I like Braun a lot. I think he's a very smart kid. Again, another one of those guys who is who's already at practice. A very whirlwind situation where he basically just got here straight after making a decision to come into the class. But familiarity helped in that case, and obviously Sam Pittman leaving Georgia had a lot to do with it as well. Opened the door for him to make that switch to change his mind on what was the best fit for him. But yeah, there's a lot to like, I think, on the offensive line, just because you have those two guys. Plus, you have a couple of underrated maulers, I think, in Leonard. He's a guy who Leonard and Mincy. Those are two guys who I like a lot. Sort of guys who they have to sort of develop, have to get better, improve their physiques, that sort of thing. But they have a foundation that should lend some upside, some potential there to kind of grow. Of the group, I like Braun probably the most. I just think that he comes from a great family background, a lineage of offensive linemen in that family. He's just the latest one. And like I said, he's a bright kid, definitely taking advantage of UF being a top 10 academic place. Let me tell you that. He's smart, man.
Yeah, and I know I say bookend tackles. He is somebody who's so big that he may fit into guard at some point
Yeah.
as well, because he's kind of a mauler as well. Likes to get nasty in the run game as well. So I say bookend tackles just because where he played in high school here, but somebody who could switch over. Will, I know you have to go soon here and take care of some other things. What can our listeners know what you have going on in the Athletic this week with the signing period being front and center?
I appreciate you even asking me, man. Thanks for having me on, as always. It's great, always great talk. I'll have some takeaways on the 2020 class. We covered a lot of it, but just more in detail. A lot of things that we discussed. Next day or so, I'll also have more of a TikTok story on how Josh Braun got into the class after leaving Georgia's class. It's kind of a weird, wacky couple of days. Not really wacky, but just kind of intense, or a lot of things happened very quickly for them. It was kind of fun to talk to John Hevesy about that and kind of pick his brain about what that was like. So that's kind of a fun story, something along the lines of what I put together when Derek Wingo made a similar flip from Penn State.
Awesome. So you can find Will and his work at The Athletic. Go to the website, download the app, and get all the good coverage there. So Will, man, thank you much. I'll probably end the episode. I got some tweets to get to, and we'll look at some targets that the Gators are in for February. But man, thank you once again for hopping on Gators Breakdown.
Man, always a blast. Thanks, David.
All right. Will Sammon from The Athletic, where you can find his work there. So, yeah, we just discussed all the pretty much every position there that the Gators pulled in here on this early signing period. So look, first we'll go through the kind of the storyline of the day here. We know Florida was able to keep their commitments coming into today, but there was a lot of targets out there that Florida was in for. Not so much for E.J. Smith. We'll start with him, the running back from Texas, Emmitt Smith's son. I didn't necessarily feel good about that one coming into today, and it played out that way. It was either going to be Texas A&M or Stanford, and it ended up being Stanford as the choice there. So, of course, I know there's a lot of heat on running back coach Greg Knox to get a running back there and missed. I won't necessarily say, I guess you could say missed on E.J. Smith, but once that Stanford offer come in, I knew it was going to be kind of hard for Florida. And look, yes, you can say he maybe, the way recruiting works is a miss, but from everything I could gather, EJ just really didn't want to follow in his dad Emmett's footsteps here at Florida. He was always going to be compared to his dad, and I think he just kind of wanted to make his own story and going to either to Stanford or Texas A&M. There, I think he liked Florida, but I think there were some other things around the situation there to where yeah, it just wasn't probably just wasn't meant to be for him. Wide receiver Sam Brown, of course, took his visit to Florida this past weekend. Um, Decided that he was going to make his decision on Wednesday on signing day, and most thought that would be a good sign for Florida. But he chooses West Virginia in the end. Florida wasn't even a hat on the table at that, so that was where some of the inside info just wasn't right there. But as I said, Corey Bender from Rivals came on here on Gators Breakdown on Monday night and said West Virginia was the school to look out for. He was picking Florida, but West Virginia was the school to look out for, and Sam Brown ends up picking West Virginia. Big miss of the day here, and I know everybody felt good about getting Timothy Smith and Donnell Harris a couple days ago, but it was starting to come out late on Tuesday night, the day before signing day, that it didn't look good for Timothy Smith or Donnell Harris, and that's exactly the way it played out here. Timothy Smith kept with his commitment to Alabama, and Donnell Harris kept with his commitment to Texas A&M. And Timothy Smith, probably the big miss here. I know Florida was hard on him and trying to get him to flip from Alabama. He took 8 visits this fall, I think, or 8 visits total to Florida. And a lot of people say, hey, follow the visits, and that's where you can kind of tell where these kids are going. Well, we were following the visits, and we thought that would help Florida in the end here. So, I know Jervon Dexter really thought that wasn't super confident, but thought Smith would end up a Gator. But yeah, that one hurts. That one hurts a little bit. And that was a chance to look. This defensive line's already really good, above average, really, really good defensive line. That would have taken it to an elite level. That would have taken this defensive line to uncharted territory for what we've seen along the defensive front here for the Gators in recent years. So, and then Donnell Harris, more the defensive end type there, kind of trolls Florida with having a Florida sweater on, ends up taking it off and revealing Texas A&M. If you were on Periscope with me earlier today, you heard where it was supposed to probably be a hat to begin with, where he was going to fake put a Florida hat on, and it ends up putting a Texas A&M hat on there. So yeah, just some shenanigans there with Harris and him sticking with Texas A&M. Don't know what that was about. I don't know why he felt the need to do that to Florida there. It kind of shows. Well, I think when kids do that, of course, we like seeing it when Florida guys do it, but overall, probably shows a lack of respect for the other school. But that's just the way it plays out there. So Timothy Smith sticks with Alabama. Donnell Harris sticks with Texas A&M. And then a little bit of drama today. Clyde Pender, who was a North Carolina commit, delayed his announcement. And some people thought, hey, maybe he wants to see what Timothy Smith's going to do. And if he doesn't choose Florida, maybe Pender will choose Florida. And that's not really the way it played out there. Clyde Pender delayed his decision, but I believe it was around 6:30, 7 o'clock. On signing day night, Clyde Pender ends up sticking with North Carolina. So, one thing I do want to get into with this, absolutely, it's disappointing. The day when you were in for so many of these top recruits, and they end up choosing somewhere else. But let's not forget, this Florida just recently flipped 2 guys on Braun and McDaniel last Friday. If those guys were to hold off and made their decisions today, you'd feel much better about today. So timing is everything. I put that on Twitter today. It's kind of a tweet, kind of summarizing this thought here. I mean, look, it's just the way timing is everything. Perception, that's kind of changed perception a little bit. Not trying to make an excuse here for the staff for the way today itself played out. Still a really good class overall. had a really good start coming into today. It played out. You didn't lose guys. Yes, it would have been nice to get these guys, because look, you would, if you could have went out there and pulled in Sam Brown and added another receiver for some depth, and pulled in Timothy Smith and Donnell Harris and made this defensive class elite. I mean, it's on the verge of elite anyway, I think, with Wingo and Dexter. But you get Smith and Harrison, I mean, that would have put this defensive class over the top there. So just a way to look at it, though. I mean, if guys would have waited to make their decisions today, I don't think you'd feel so bad about the way that kind of played out there. So state of Florida recruiting as well. I'll quickly hit on that before I get to some of your tweets. Florida signed and have committed right now the most state of Florida kids in the country with 16. And, look, Florida needed to do that with the way FSU and Miami's struggling right now. But it is the top, players in the state where that's lacking. And, of course, you count IMG kids the way you want to count them or however. But, two of the top five and DeMarcus Bowman and Fred Davis are going to Clemson, two guys that have nothing to do with IMG. Jervon Dexter comes in as the fifth-ranked player in the state. He is headed to Florida, but then Georgia comes in and grabs the seventh and ninth best players in the state there for their team. And then 10th best was Donnell Harris, and he's going to Texas A&M. So, Florida, you want to start seeing some of the top 10 players in the state stay in state, and Florida's doing a better job of that for 2021 class. But for this class in particular, look, I just mentioned it in Bowman and Clemson. I know a lot of Gator fans were kind of holding out hope. I don't know why. It was long gone. He wasn't coming to Florida. But to me, and kind of relating it back to EJ Smith and the whole running back recruiting thing, it's a miss. And I don't care what the excuse is. The running back recruiting has to get better. I was okay with losing Trey Sanders because I thought there was a really good chance of getting DeMarcus Bowman. But I said at the time, if you miss on Trey Sanders, you have to rebound. And you have to get a player like DeMarcus Bowman. And it didn't play out that way. So Florida's got to get better. Florida has to get better at running back recruiting. And I know a lot of people throw out, hey, Urban Meyer didn't have a true running back. I don't care what Urban Meyer had. It won some games there, but I don't care. Go out there and get a running back. Go out there and get a high-profile running back and make this offense even better. So just because one thing was one way doesn't mean it has to be this way for Dan Mullen. So we'll see how it all plays out. We'll see, kind of the next topic here of what, is targets that Florida has going into February. And, this was just the first part of signing day and getting players. This early signing period lasts for 3 days, and then we have to wait till February to get the next crop of Gators here. And looking at running back Jahmyr Gibbs, the Georgia Tech commit, see what he does. Ohio State in the mix, kind of the school I'm favoring if he leaves Georgia Tech. If Georgia offers, it's definitely over. He wants to go. I've heard he wants to go to Georgia if Georgia offers. Maybe Henry Parrish as well. Maybe some grades issues there. I don't know. I'm trying to follow up on that, but I know that was kind of thrown out there. But we'll see. He was committed to Pitt at one time. So we'll see there. I like what Parrish brings to the table there. But if I had my pick of attainable running backs, I really like Jahmyr Gibbs. Of course, Devontae Williams at safety, one of the bigger targets on the board, left out there. Look for Florida to be in the mix with him heavily. He'll take some visits after decommitting from Oregon and trying to pick out his next school. Have to like Florida's chances, I think, as it stands right now. Xavier Henderson, wide receiver. Don't see him coming to Florida. Christopher Henderson's little brother. Clemson, Alabama battle, I think, there to look out for. And DeMarcus Beckwith, tight end out there to keep an eye on as we march toward January and how it all plays out there for the February signing date. If you missed it earlier, some transfers to look out for. Joshua Corbin, he's a running back transfer for Texas A&M. May have to fight Florida State for him if he decides to come back home to the state of Florida, and a couple of wide receiver transfers as well. Justin Shorter, the wide receiver transfer from Penn State, and Tariq Black transfer from Michigan. So I got a lot of your thoughts out there. You guys have sent me a good bit of thoughts of how you thought this class and how this day played out for the early signing period for the Gators. And here we go. Let's see. X54X says, Good class, and the talent disparity shouldn't be so much as to make us uncompetitive. In our 2 losses this year, we were manhandled up front. This class goes a long way toward fixing that. Yeah, we hit that. We hit on that earlier, Will and I. So yeah, I still think Florida's on the right track here. May take a little longer than we expect. We're not getting the top 5 classes right away. I still think it's close. I still think the talent disparity is close enough. You had the 7-point loss to Georgia, and look, don't just look at that game either. I think look at the way the whole season played out, and Georgia didn't necessarily, especially as the season went on, wasn't really blowing teams out. They were in close games left and right with Auburn and Texas A&M, lost to South Carolina, and Florida looked better against some of the similar opponents there. So I don't think you can look at just the Florida-Georgia game and say just how far the teams are from each other. Take the season as a whole. Florida and Georgia are not that far apart. I still say Georgia's roster is better top to bottom, but I still think not that far when you look at the big picture of things. Brian Hicks says, if all I read was tweets and had no idea who we actually landed, I think we had the worst class in UF history. He goes, in fact, we had a great day. Is running back an issue? Sure, but mainly because of how it went down. We're still better than good. In Mullen, we trust. CPIG9 says everyone made excuses for Muschamp and McElwain the first 2 years as well. Just saying. Really good class, but certainly not the standard. Dan's got to own the clear misses this year and make adjustments. And look, I know coaching changes are a hot topic out there. If you guys have listened to Gators Breakdown for years, you guys know I was probably one of the last ones on the fire McElwain train. That's just not my mentality there. I'm not a big firearm guy. But something definitely has to be done, especially to me for running back recruiting. Billy Gonzalez, I think, saves himself a good bit with wide receivers and the way they perform on the field. I think he's a really good coach, a really good teacher at the wide receiver position. And we'll see how this wide receiver class plays out. Where Frazier's and Manuel, I like those two a lot. I like those two a lot together. And I kind of was counting on Brown to be in this class as well for some depth pieces. But if you get Frazier's and Manuel and you get some transfers in at the wide receiver position, I can kind of defend Gonzalez much more than I can defend Knox and the running back position and how that's turning out right now. But I'm not a big firearm guy, but I do think some changes have to be made. I have to kind of take that maybe next step in recruiting here. So Donovan German says the 3 I thought would make an elite class: Tim Smith, Henderson, and Gibbs. 2 are signing in February. Missed on Smith. Room for improvement, but happy with who signed. The sky isn't falling. They've been saying that crap on signing day for years. 20-5 in that span. Trust Coach Dan Mullen. He goes, losing Taylor Chase says losing Harris isn't a big deal because of how deep we are there. But losing Tim Smith is so bad considering how many times we got him on campus. And yeah, as I said in discussing him, there's the whole follow the visits thing. And I think a lot of people felt good about how many times he had been on campus and all the pictures he was taking with the recruits there this past weekend. And I think there was reasons to feel good, and I felt good, except late last night coming into signing day there. So things change. Things change in recruiting a lot this time of year, leading up to signing day. So yeah, it does hurt. Disappointing day, but I still say not disappointing overall here. So Patrick at P Dizzle for Shiz. Everyone is so wrapped up in early signing day. Let the dust settle and see who's still not signed. Then the coaches will figure it out. The game plan, who fits our needs. Plus, everyone is forgetting the portal options out there at receiver and possibly running back. Chris Tomley says Smith hurt because he's a difference maker. Harris has more indifferent on due to position and need, but good player. Funny part is we do it right at wide receiver and running back in the portal, and we could have a top 8 class, but be right in those top 5 in total talent, including Cox. So yeah, of course, Brenton Cox, transfer from Georgia, is kind of included in this class. He didn't play this year. He'll play this year with these guys. But will be more of an impact player as being a transfer and having some playing experience already. So if you want to count him in this class, you can. But for the sake of this episode and for the sake of how we do, looking at 24/7 sports rankings and looking at the class, Brent Cox not included in the rankings there. Peyton Mitchell says, we had a bad day trying to flip kids, but we didn't lose any to another program. We didn't have committed kids coming into the day deciding between teams. As bad as today was, it could always be worse. And as I said, I give Mullen a lot of credit for that. And he's right. We saw Tim Smith, Alabama. They didn't know where he was going as of yesterday. And maybe even early this morning, they had no idea. And Harris, St. Mark, Texas A&M, had to question where he was at. Florida didn't have that. Florida didn't have a guy who was, Gervon Dexter, I want to say his name right, wasn't coming in deciding between Florida and Georgia. We knew he was going to Florida. Wingo wasn't coming in and trying to decide between Penn State and Florida. We knew he was signing with Florida. So I do think a lot of credit gets there, needs to go to Dan Mullen as far as that goes, and making sure Florida was hanging on to their guys. So, yeah, there we go. Man, mouthful tonight. Exhausted following all this all day long. Thanks to so many of you out there for all the communication, all the talk today here on Early Signing Day on Twitter. Pretty much all day long. I took the day off of my normal work schedule to be able to keep up with everything and put this episode out there for you guys. Everybody out there on YouTube who's listening right now. Kyle Boardman, let's see, Casual Carolina Fishing, Hardwire, Self-Destruction. I know you guys, I'll throw some shout outs to you for always being there on the YouTube chat. It's hard to keep up with the chat as I kind of produce and talk on the show at the same time. But big shout out to you guys. Shout out to everybody on Twitter as well who continues to follow Gators Breakdown, share it out there. I just went over 10,000 followers on Twitter because of you listeners out there and the followers out there for all the trust that I get to all the trust that you guys put in me, and I really appreciate it. And as far as recruiting goes, and I know a lot of people ask me kind of what's going on leading up to signing day. I try to give it to you truthfully. I don't try and blow smoke there. Some stuff kind of have to keep secret for sake of kids and stuff like that. Don't want to ruin their moment. I think that's the most important thing here. And kind of the most important thing when looking at the day too. I know we're disappointed in some aspect of recruiting for that, but enjoy the players that Florida did get. Don't throw away the ones Florida had in the fold and the kids that have been committed for a long time. So we pretty much think we know how all this kind of plays out with recruiting, but sometimes you just never know who's going to be that guy, who shows up and is a big time contributor to Florida here. So that's just kind of the way things play out here and on signing day. So everybody, thanks so much for all the interaction, all the listens, all the follows, and making Gators Breakdown what it is as we put this early signing day behind us here. So the schedule for next week, there will be an episode Christmas week, I think, for previewing Virginia. We'll probably have some more signing day coverage as well as kind of it all just the fallout from it. Look to more deep dives into comparisons to some other schools out there, possibly there. But we'll see. Definitely an episode next week, one episode next week since it is Christmas, and more than likely there'll be a lot of Orange Bowl talk and getting ready for Virginia. So thanks to Will Sammon once again from The Athletic. Join me here on Gators Breakdown for his insight into this early signing period. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.